The U.S. has a very limited
Mhm.
homeland missile defense capability. And so the math for the United States actually doesn't look very favorable.
You mentioned about the KN-23. It has been used in Ukraine war by Russia. How do you see using the KN-23 in Ukraine help to North Korea? Thank you for coming, Ankit. So you're an expert on missile and North Korea missile capability and nuclear as well. A lot of viewer and listener for RFA, they know North Korea tests missile a lot, right? But ICBM it could reach to the United States. So do you think if North Korea decide to launch ICBM right now, do you think the US gonna be vulnerable at this moment?
So that's a good question. I mean, first of all, would North Korea launch an ICBM? Probably not. It would be essentially suicidal, right? There's no reason for North Korea
Yeah.
to attack the United States
Definitely.
unprovoked. But the technical question that you asked about, can North Korea essentially detonate a nuclear warhead over an American city? The answer to that question, in my view, is that very probably yes. Every weapon system that exists, American ICBMs, Russian ICBMs, missiles in other countries, any given weapon system has some probability of failure. You just can't eliminate that. The North Koreans the reliability that they have is probably a lot lower than what the United States has, but it's probably sufficient for the purposes that Kim Jong-un seeks, which is to deter the United States.
What about the U.S. defense side? Do you think it's available to shoot it down to North Korean ICBM?
So the U.S. has a very limited homeland missile defense capability. We have a total of 44 interceptors that are capable of destroying incoming ICBMs. These interceptors are actually deployed in Alaska. There's 40 of them in Alaska and 4 of them in California. Probably the U.S. would look to use 3 to 4 interceptors against one incoming ICBM reentry vehicle. And so then if you're North Korea, you have a solution to this problem, right? You build more ICBMs. And so that is where the North Koreans have gone. They have, I think, more than 20 launchers today capable of launching ICBMs. And so the math for the United States actually doesn't look very favorable on missile defense. And look, it's not just missile defense for the United States. In a war, the United States would try to also find and destroy these North Korean missile launchers if they could. And so you'd have to essentially say, what's the chance that the United States, how many missiles could the United States destroy before they launch? How many missiles could launch successfully? Of those missiles that launch, how many get intercepted? We can have a debate about what level of vulnerability that presents for the United States. I would still argue that that is a chance that would be very difficult for an American president to take, this idea that the North Koreans could launch ICBMs and our interceptors might not actually work.
Let's talk about SLBM. North Korea is also developing SLBM right now. They also mentioned that they almost finished the development of the ICBM and they move into SLBM. Why do you think they developing the SLBM?
I think the first reason is the prestige. The second reason, I think, is the inherent interest in having a triad, essentially. Kim could potentially also look at putting nuclear weapons on North Korean aircraft. The final reason, though, I think is interesting, which is that Kim Jong-un has tried to, over his leadership tenure, he tries to give attention to each part of the KPA, the Korean People's Army. So he gives attention to the ground forces, to the naval forces, to the air force. And I think there's probably an incentive within the North Korean system to make sure that the Korean People's Navy has a role to play in the nuclear mission. This has been a common explanation for why other countries have moved their nuclear forces to sea as well.
You mentioned about the KN-23. It has been used in Ukraine war by Russia. So how do you see using the KN-23 in Ukraine help to North Korea in Korean Peninsula when there's a crisis on it?
The use of the KN-23 against Ukraine marked the first ever use of North Korean ballistic missiles in war, right? So that in itself is quite important. Because you can do all the testing you want in peacetime. You can do exercises on your own territory, but there's something quite different to the experience of operating a missile on a real battlefield. And the Russians, we think the Russians were operating these missiles with the help of North Korean technical advisors who were also collecting data on how these missiles were performing, feeding that back to the Academy of Defense Science. If you're trying to leverage those types of tactical nuclear weapons for maximal military utility, let's say you want to hit an airfield in South Korea that has F-35s that you can't deal with once they take off, so you have to destroy them before they take off. You really need to make sure that the yield of the weapon and the precision of the missile match, essentially, in terms of the mission that you're trying to accomplish. And so I really think that we shouldn't underrate the ways in which North Korea's missile transfers to Russia are very directly augmenting Kim Jong-un's nuclear ambitions and strategy.
North Korea getting a lot from Russia, even food or other things, but technology for missile technology. So what kind of missile technology do they need from the Russia right at this moment?
The area where I think the Russians can really help them, though, is with guidance, with guidance computers, cruise missile maneuvering, cruise missile control, and potentially even countermeasures, other types of ways in which to just improve the reliability of North Korea's manufacturing standards for missile systems. So all of that, I think, will happen, is probably happening in some form. Space launch technologies, too, I think the Russians will be very, very eager to help the North Koreans out.
So do you think is there any possible President Putin or other Russian government official mention acknowledge North Korea as a nuclear state?
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has pretty explicitly said that Russia no longer views North Korea as a non-proliferation concern. Essentially, since the early 1990s, the major powers, China, Russia, the United States, and Japan, South Korea, the European Union, the whole world has seen North Korea as a non-proliferation problem. They're the only country to have signed the non-proliferation treaty, left that treaty, and built nuclear weapons. So it matters how you deal with North Korea for that reason. But it also matters in a big way that the North Koreans are really presenting unacceptable nuclear risks, in my opinion, to the United States and its allies. And so that demands a focus on risk reduction. And so this fact that Trump has called North Korea a nuclear power, I know that got quite a bit of a reaction in South Korea.
Now, he is a nuclear power.
I've made the argument that, first of all, it's sort of overrated the issue of what we call North Korea, right? North Korea has very publicly said in the past that they actually don't care about the status question of whether or not they're acknowledged. And they will never be a nuclear weapon state under the NPT, right? Which is the only legitimate form of nuclear possession that really exists in the international system.
So how do you see North Korea nuclear missile technology near in future in 10 years if we don't have any negotiation or any talks?
Yeah, so I think about this quite a bit because I do think it's probably the likely outcome that Kim will continue to modernize and size up his nuclear forces. Look, the North Korean objective with its nuclear modernization is to get to a point where what those of us in the nuclear strategy field call the condition of mutual vulnerability manifests between the United States and North Korea. And what does that mean? That means that Kim Jong-un has to feel confident. And this is very subjective, right? I've never met Kim Jong-un. I don't know what's in his mind. But Kim has to feel confident that no matter the crisis, no matter the war, the conventional war, that the United States and South Korea will not be able to destroy all of his nuclear weapons. That's something, and that in turn, the President of the United States and the President of Republic of Korea will understand that they can't destroy all of Kim's nuclear weapons, which means that deterrence is stable because in a war, North Korea will always be vulnerable to U.S. nuclear attack. It'll be vulnerable to South Korean conventional attack. But in turn, North Korea will have enough nuclear weapons on submarines, nuclear weapons in lakes, on rail cars, in silos, on road mobile launchers, all over the place, that the allies will be very cautious in how they prosecute a war.
Okay, thank you so much for today's talk.
Of course, thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right, and that is a cut.